Right, if people would like to find a seat, just some of the formalities as you're arriving. Firstly, a huge welcome if this is your first time to the campus. Welcome back if this is the second time or third time or 100th time to Moorlands here at Christ Church. Just in terms of those in the room, there are toilets just at the very entrance on the left and on the right. If there is a fire alarm, it's not a test, it will be the real thing, and so our assembly point will be in the car park. So just make your way out through one of the fire doors if that happens. And are we live online as well right now? We are. So a big welcome to those who are joining us. We've got around about 70 or 80 people joining us online. My name's Andy. I'm principal at Moorlands College and absolutely privileged to serve here, be part of a wonderful staff team and an incredible set of students. We have around about 260, 280 students at any one point studying on undergraduate, postgraduate, and we partner with churches, Christian organizations to strengthen what they do through year-out programs and other bits and pieces. So welcome. If this is your first time connecting with us, I'm going to pray, open in prayer, and then I'm going to invite a couple of guests who are going to come and share with us. I'll talk through the shape of the evening as well. I'm going to invite my friends up. We're going to be engaging in a conversation about AI. We're going to be talking about a number of the key themes that as Christians we need to be wrestling with if we haven't been wrestling with already. And one of my prayers is tonight people will leave the call and this room feeling a little bit better equipped to answer people, to engage theologically, how to think theologically about artificial intelligence and its place in the world. So that's my hope and that's my prayer. I will pray. We'll spend around about 50 minutes diving in conversation initially, and then we'll press pause for about 15, 20 minutes. And we'll come back afterwards, and from then on, the conversation will not be directed by me. It'll be directed by the questions and comments that you have. And so there are going to be two QR codes which are up on the screen. The first is a QR code which will ask you two questions. And I'd encourage you to answer those honestly in terms of your own reflection. And the second QR code is to an open question forum. And so I'll receive your questions through the evening, and around about 8:10 through till 9 o'clock, I'll be posing your questions to the panel. So that's the plan for the evening. So let me pray. Welcome the Lord who's already among us. Let's pray. And Father, we do thank you for your work and your concern for the world. Thank you that God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. Whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. Thank you that tells us that you sought to be involved in your world. You didn't see just being a transcendent God above everything and far removed as something to be satisfied with, but you presenced yourself. You engaged and you brought redemption and salvation, and we give you thanks for that. Lord, as we, your created works, seek to be more like Jesus, help us engage well with the things of the world. Help us think rightly, think biblically about the situations we find ourselves in. Lead us in our thinking this evening, we pray. In Jesus' name, for his glory. Amen. Amen. So I just want to welcome up my colleague, Tim Miller. He's, in fact, Dr. Tim Miller. There you are. And Lester Wade, who is a current master's student studying. So come and join me. Let's just give them a little round of applause. I've been in enough places where I take the applause at the very start because you don't know if you're going to get it at the end, right? So there you are. Enjoy that applause because, we'll see how we end. There are two QR codes popping up now, if we're able to put them up. There's a link if you're joining online so that you can access those two. There's a quick poll if you want on the YouTube, go ahead and scan that or put that link in. And there's a couple of questions to answer. And then there'll be, through the evening, there'll be a QR code for posing questions. But I want to just pause first for a moment. And why don't you, we're going to be talking a lot about AI tonight. And before I even ask you to share your name and what you do and things like that, let's actually start with a bit of a working definition. When we're talking about AI, what is it that we're actually talking about? Because that would really help some of us understand the premises. So, Lester.
Maybe.
There
we go. Perfect. Okay, so I will try and maybe tackle it. I think for most folks, it's working with what they've already seen out there. So artificial intelligence, machine learning, actually since the end of the Second World War, there was quite a lot of research into it. There were things like the perceptron by Rosenblatt, which was like 53 or something. Before even things like ChatGPT arrived, there was machine learning in your Roomba vacuum cleaner. It was using image or vision recognition to find its way around, right? If you use Gmail, you used spam filters, which use sort of Bayesian mechanics to like accurately, well, kind of maybe accurately, filter spam from your inbox. So the thing is, it's been around for a while, but I think really things like ChatGPT and sort of a genius marketing move, where they just made it freely available, an LLM, that put it in the hands of everyone. So then everyone could experience very directly a large language model, which is essentially a statistical mechanism for generating the probability of the next token or word in something. So what it does is it takes a big load of text or material, chunks it up into tokens, which could be like a letter or set of letters, and then it tries to predict what the next one will be. So in that sense, it's actually not maybe as intelligent as we might think it seems when we type into our chat interface and ask it questions. It's actually just trying to probabilistically find the next response. So I think that understanding of the mechanics, particularly where we are now, is actually quite important because it kind of frames it. Otherwise, we can get carried away and think it's
more than it
actually is.
Tim, would you want to add anything to that definition?
Not really. I'm glad, Lester, you started there because I'm not particularly technical or you don't quite understand quite how it works. I think it's pretty magical when you go to the large language models online and you type a question in and it creates an answer that seems like it's being written by a human. So I don't understand the background. I'm not the technical one, so I'm glad you got that.
So let's just throw a couple more in. So you've used LLM, which is large language model, and chatbot, is that essentially synonymous? Is that the same thing?
Essentially, the chatbot is the inference layer on top of that. So what that means is that when you go to your chat box with ChatGPT, or other models are available, and you go and use it, you're using a chat interface or a chat service, which is an inference capability. What it's trying to do is infer from what you've asked it what you're trying to get at. So that's why it's essentially called that. I mean, I'm simplifying things a fair bit, but so they are parts of the same architecture. If you think about like a building, you might have, the foundations and some pillars and a roof and these kind of things. It's part of the architecture, but it is different. Right.
Now, the other term that some people may be familiar with is AGI. So just brief definition of AGI. What are we talking about? Is it a reality at the moment? Because that is the bit where you said, it ain't that smart. And I'm thinking, but AGI is kind of that smart. So tell us just briefly about AGI.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like our AI as artificial intelligence, or a form of machine learning, artificial intelligence, I think, is actually a pretty good definition for it because it's artificial intelligence. So it's an artificial sense of intelligence from this system or service, right? Now, I think AGI goes a bit beyond that and tries to say, okay, well, so for example, if you've got Tesla and you've got self-driving in the US, which I was in just last week and utterly amazed by it, but if you're sat in one and it's driving you places, it's very good at a particular thing, which is driving a car, right? So you can have sort of a specialization or a focus in particular areas. Something like AGI would be appearing to be intelligent across all sorts of domains. So it would be a very, very wide umbrella of artificial intelligence. At least that's how I would probably describe it. I'm sure Other technologists would probably be a bit more specific, perhaps, but that's essentially
Yeah.
what it would be.
So if as happened in the States, many people decide to order the same driverless car to their cul-de-sac and then just sit back and watch what happens, it's an absolute show, isn't it? Because these cars can only act within their kind of understanding. They can't take a sort of top down and go, hey, all these driverless cars, and they can absolutely get jammed up. So they're kind of farcical moments because of the limitations of AI.
Yeah. So there was a big moment or a few moments actually, I think in San Francisco with like Waymos and stuff where it was getting log jammed all in the same place and those kind of things. But I think that yes, essentially, they are specialized in a particular way, and they have been for a while, right?
Yeah.
Something like Tesla's self-driving capabilities predates, an LLM and ChatGPT. So they would fall in the same category of things, but they are different.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's good. So that's kind of definitions out of the way. I want to know what you're bringing to the table. So maybe if we start with Tim, why are we here, Tim? What's driving you? What's your particular area of study and your particular passion? I'm going to give Tim 5 minutes or so just to share about who he is, why he's in this place today. Same with Lester, just to share a little bit about themselves. And I think we'll glean a lot from that, and I may loop back to some of the things that you say, but I'll let you speak unbridled for a few minutes right now, so that doesn't happen.
Thanks, Andy. I think this all started several months ago when Andy and I were chatting just in the corridor, and I said, I think we should have a debate about this, because really concerned about AI, and I guess to draw on Lester's definition, I'm thinking about the way that we typically use large language models such as ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, those kind of things, the way that we're using them and how that is forming us. I think that as a church, we need to be thinking about those things from a theological perspective. I think we need to kind of think theologically about all the issues here, and I think there are a number of issues that the church can and should speak into. The environmental impact, for one, the way that, huge power is required to fuel the data centers and, lots of water required to cool them. I read in The Guardian recently that a lot of these AI companies are using people at minimum wage in the global south to kind of moderate the comments on these large language models, which is causing great trauma because they're having to look through the worst that people are writing into these and the worst conversations that the people are having into these with these chatbots. I think the issue of job losses is huge. And all of these things I think the church needs to wrestle with, and I think we can and should have a prophetic voice into these kind of ethical issues on a grand sort of societal level. But I think what I'm much more interested in is just how my daily use of Claude or ChatGPT or whatever it is, how that is forming me. And for the students that are here in our college, how the daily use of these kind of tools is forming them. What is it doing for them? Because I think often as Christians, we think that new technological tools are morally neutral, that they can be used for good or for bad. And we want to think about how we use these tools for good purposes rather than bad purposes. But actually, I want to argue that consistent use of these tools does shape us. It changes the way we relate to the world. It changes the way we relate to one another. It changes the way we relate to God and think about ourselves and the world, regardless of whether we're using the tool for good or for bad. So I think the promise of AI is, here's a tool that you can do more with, that can make you more productive, can with greater efficiency and ease, it can do better things for you. And I think that's the kind of promise of it. And I think there's some things that are problematic about that I think we need to wrestle with theologically. So my stance wouldn't be that we should never use these tools, but I do think we want to think carefully about how they're forming us. So firstly, I think we learn and grow through trial and challenge. So when things happen easily for us, we don't grow as a result of that. Joe Irving Walton, the kind of educational psychologist, said, if generative AI reliably reduces friction, it will be used, not because people are unethical, but because it offers relief. It lowers the cognitive cost of production in systems that already reward visible output. So what she's saying there is that we live in a world that values output and speed, and in a world that values those things, AI promises that we can do those things even better and even faster. But the cost of that is the loss of critical thinking skills, the loss of deep wrestling, of doing hard things. We learn judgment and wisdom and discernment through the struggle, which I think we lose when we rely on AI to do that thinking for us. Secondly, and I think more importantly from a theological perspective, we're not designed to be, we're not supposed to be infinite beings. We're supposed to be finite creatures in relation to an infinite God. We're supposed to be dependent upon him. And I think there's a sense in which AI tempts us to transgress our God-given limits, the limits of humanity, which, by the way, I think were part of the very first temptation. Eat this fruit and you can be like God. And I think there's something about that that's tempting with AI. Limits are given by God, and I think if we see them rightly, they are a gift of God, which emphasizes our dependence on our creaturely status. And I think, we see this time and time and again throughout the Bible, but I think specifically in the incarnation of Jesus, we see that embodiment is really important, that human finitude is important. So Jesus was tired. Jesus was hungry. And I think there's something a little bit Gnostic about AI in that it highlights the cognitive and elevates the cognitive and says, there's a sense in what we value is the cognitive rational thought rather than the embodiment of what it means to be human. I think, thirdly, we're designed for community. And I think one of the ways that AI reduces friction is by minimizing the need for human interaction. Because whereas in the past I might have gone to a friend to say, hey, can you check my work? I've got this, I think we might come back to preaching later, but I've got this sermon outline, what do you think about this? Can I run some ideas past you? We're now going to AI. And so what AI is doing there is minimizing friction. It's making things easier for us by removing the human interaction of it. And I think, when we see, we probably are all aware of this, aren't we? The way in which that AI has replaced people's needs for intimacy. And so people are turning to AI for intimate relational encounters. And I think what that's doing is it's mistaking simulation for presence in a way that actually degrades humanity. And I think theologically that's important. Real community is messy. It's embodied, it's challenging. And I think the offer of AI, which always seems to agree with you, politely, offers a frictionless shortcut that promises the same benefits, but is ultimately fake. Finally, I think AI can tempt us to outsource moral responsibility. So we've all seen examples, haven't we, of the way, and if you've interacted with these tools, you know that AI is designed to deliberately appear human. It puts in ums and ahs, doesn't it, if you're speaking to it in voice. It does those kind of things. And we often treat it as an independent agent, right? So you see headlines, things like AI took our jobs, right? And I think this is something that humans have been doing for millennia, isn't it? That systemic sin, we remove accountability for systemic sin by blaming it on the process or, things like that. And so the latest iteration of that, I think this idea of AI becoming an independent moral agent, I think outsources moral responsibility that should be on human beings, which again, I think is problematic from a theological perspective. So, I'm not at all saying that we shouldn't use these tools whatsoever, but I'm saying I think if we are going to use these tools, I think there's some significant things that we need to think about there in terms of how they're shaping us. And you haven't stopped me, so
I haven't.
I probably have gone
this sounds
on
about
over
the appropriate length
I
that
have.
you should
Okay,
share
fine.
for.
Right.
But certainly, very strong voice right there. And I think that was when we first had the idea of the debate. I'd come off the back of writing my MBA dissertation on AI and small medium enterprises, and it was actually quite largely positive as a kind of approach reflecting on that. So, and yours was quite distinctly, let's say, less positive, but really helpful. I'm going to loop back to some of those things, but before I do, let's allow Lester just to share a little bit about your own work, a little bit about your research, what you're doing, the passion that you bring to this area.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm a master's student here at Moorlands. I have worked in technology for about 20 years or so. Worked at Amazon, Google, worked on things like Alexa in the early days, those kind of things. So I've been quite close to technology for a long time now. And so this seemed like a very straightforward topic to choose, I suppose, given sort of current trends and things like that. But I think for me it was a number of different threads which started to converge somewhat. I think through some of the reading on the course, from the likes of, say, Francis Schaeffer, as sort of a cultural apologist in the sort of 60s, 70s, and looking at certain books of the Bible like Revelation. And it's interesting that John Lennox has just produced a book on Revelation and the age of AI. I can't remember what the title is because I'm still reading it. But these things started to converge somewhat because I think what I was curious about was, as Christians, we've probably historically been pretty bad at critically engaging with technology. So we've just sort of taken it and gone, yeah, I'll just use that, no problem, right? Without just stopping to think, well, hold on a minute, should I use it a bit differently, or should I, stop using this and use more of this, and those kind of things. I think, like Tim says, things like the sort of what MIT, I think, the study there has described as cognitive surrender. These kind of things are very real. If you offload a lot of effort to AI agents, maybe even multiple agents. At work we use a lot of different agents all at the same time, doing all sorts of certain things. And you're there sort of directing them to do stuff. But the thing is, it's very easy to slip into a model of just offloading a lot of your thinking onto these things, which, as we were looking at the definition of them earlier, we should not anthropomorphize them, right? It is essentially a next level of automation in IT. I've been working on automation in systems for a long time. If you look at very large, you order an app or a taxi on Uber or something like this, you're interfacing with a service and a platform which has layers and layers and layers of complexity, and all sorts of automation keeps that running. And what we're really getting into is even better automation, essentially, which can do more things autonomously than we had previously. But it really is just a step change. And so not engaging critically with the technology was curious to me because you look at, I think it was maybe the first lecture I had with you, I think, Andy, which was, you showed us an example of a Wikipedia page, and I think it was the watchmaker, fine-tuning argument, I think it was. And you edited the Wikipedia page, and within a few minutes, it had changed back again. And all you were doing was opening the door to, this might be an example of fine-tuning or something. Very tame, add to the page. Within a few minutes, changed back, kind of locked down. There are people and engineers, developers, whatever it might be, who have a particular worldview that they are pushing through technology. So technology is not a simply kind of amoral instrument. It carries values. And those values that it carries can be representative of the worldview that is around us, which is, a distinctly secular kind of humanist very mechanical view of the world,
Yeah.
right? And so if that is pushed through things like search engines, I think we've all had an experience of using a search engine, and it's like, how come it shows me some things and not other things? Well, the natural progression for us as users is to use LLMs and these services just like search. But when we do, we're taking more of what they present to us as, the truth or the fact. So there's an epistemological aspect to that, right? And so I found that Schaefer spoke quite prophetically into this. He was kind of an early adopter of media and television. He televised this series based on the book he wrote, How Should We Then Live? And that really fused to me the idea of worldview with our usage of technology. And when you look in the industry, there are two very polar opposites that we're kind of working within. There are sort of deceleracionists, let's call it, which is the very, what tech folks would call a very doomer narrative, like nuclear war, we're all going to die type thing. And then on the other side, there's accelerationism, which is just go faster, do more, ignore all consequences, and just build it now, type thing. And I think we have to be then, knowing that worldviews are through technology, we have to be a bit careful that we don't fall into kind of one or the other, but that we're also, from a sort of Christian principle, seeking out truth in these things as well, right? So that's kind of what got me fired up and what got me interested and starting to sort of write on it for my dissertation, which I will one day finish.
Yeah, that's good. In a moment, we're going to have a little look at the answers to the polls, but really interesting just to pick up on this point. Marshall McLuhan, another Catholic commentator on culture, he talked about the content of a media being pretty much as useless or as meaningful as the stenciling on an atomic bomb. So basically, it doesn't really matter. We all get caught up in AI slop or just the particular LLM of choice, and we're focused on what it can do for us and things like that. But both of you have kind of said, no, actually, that's just like stenciling on an atomic bomb. It's actually the big piece that's being pushed through here in terms of impact on humanity. Specifically, you've thrown something out there which, if you've read Magnificat Humanitas, which is the work by Pope Leo quite recently, he actually said that technology and AI is neutral. You both disagree. I mean, quite humbly, of course. He's got quite a big fan base. But you're disagreeing. Tell me about this idea that actually you talked about it being imbued. That's quite a strong word. That actually it's reflecting the biases of the creators, whoever those are. For example, someone who's worth $1 trillion or something like that. It inhabits, if you like, it's imbued with his values. So this is not it's not like a gun in your hand. It's who uses it. It's the actual tool itself is good or bad, but it's not neutral. Do you agree with that assessment, that the tool itself is not neutral?
I definitely agree. I mean, and I think there's different approaches here to the way that we think about technology. So on the one end of the spectrum, we have instrumentalism, which is, I wasn't quite sure that the Pope was quite so definitive. I read it, and I wasn't quite sure it was so definitive. But the idea that a certain technology can be used for good ends or for bad ends is instrumentalism. It depends on how you use it, right? Yeah. And that's expressed, to use your gun analogy, that's the saying, guns don't kill people, people kill people, right? They can be used for good or for bad. On the other end of the spectrum is the kind of technological determinism, which you're also seeing a lot of, which is like all of our problems are down to social media. And I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. I don't think that technology is just completely neutral, either to be used for good or for bad, although it can be used, I think, in the case of AI, can be used for good ends or for bad ends. But also, I guess the angle that I really want to explore a little bit is how these technologies are changing our approach to the world. We see this with every technology. You know, in the Industrial Revolution, we replaced manual labor with machine labor, and that changed the way that we think about the world. That changed our approach to work and dignity and some of these kind of things. And I think the same is true when it comes to AI. I think they can be used for good or for bad, and I think we should have that conversation. But more importantly, I think we should talk about what the unintended side effects of these technologies are.
So let me pause you there, because absolutely the Industrial Revolution made redundant many jobs, skilled labourers and things like that. But guess what? They couldn't foresee people making a living from hygiene for pets and things like that. You know, that whole idea of pet care wouldn't have even registered. But we've got the whole rack of services. You can shampoo, you can all outsourced and things like that. So the concern you had at the start about joblessness, is it not just the fact that we cannot understand the rate of change, and so we're living through this incredibly steep period of change? In fact, the quote that I used just recently in a talk on transhumanism said that change is coming faster than we can adequately prepare for. And it talked about a road in front of us, that the rate of change is so steep that we can't see the road in front of us because it's like a wall that we're seeing. So is it not just our limitation in the inability to imagine what kinds of jobs there will be in the future when the jobs market has been thrown up in the air by AI? Is that not just the issue here, that we are limited in our position right now? In 50 years' time, you'll say, oh, Tim, why did I say that time at Moorlands? Foolish. Look at all these jobs now.
Yeah, I mean, it could be the case. I mean, I think, Industrial Revolution is probably a good framing point for things in terms of, one thing we had at the beginning of that, well, maybe the beginning, yeah, kind of the beginning, which was like the Luddite movement, for example, right? Which was, I think they were going into sort of like textile mills and stuff, and like breaking looms and these kind of things, right? But they sort of broke out of, I think, what they call the sort of Malthusian trap, which is essentially they thought that that the productivity increase, let's call it, afterwards wasn't going to offset the loss of those jobs in that particular area, for example, whereas actually it just skyrocketed and jobs were found elsewhere. So I think there is very definitely a possibility there for sure. And I think, another aspect of that is the sort of lump of labor fallacy, where it's like, well, there's maybe only a certain amount of work around, and if, some robots take half of it, then there's only half left for people. But again, it can't really see what's going to come about because of the other changes that come in place. And I think that's definitely possible, because history probably teaches us that, we're going to get some of that, most likely. Right. We're
going to, as Christians on Mars or something like that, we're working in all sorts of new jobs that we can't even imagine right now. But genuinely, that is, one of the dangers is that, speaking from a place of ignorance, we cannot imagine what it will be like. And so therefore, we're instinctively negative towards it, or we have a fear of it.
And maybe sort of famous last words, but like on the IT side of things, I think what we're seeing for folks in industry is that if people are empowered by agents, using AI agents to do particular work, they start shifting their focus to sort of higher value tasks. Yeah. And actually what it means is they're getting stuff done kind of quicker and more volume. Now you could say in one sense, oh, well, that's just chasing productivity or whatever, which is, maybe there's a fair argument there. But the thing is, I think we already see this as like an empowerment. And also, I know a few folks who are using coding agents to try and build software who have no software development experience, but have an idea that they want to go and build. Yeah. So, and it's very empowering for them to just suddenly go, I can write out and tell it to build things for me, and it actually works, and it's actually very nice to see them, achieving what they wanted in a sense, right? I know that's, quite a sort of a maybe worldly view of things in a way, but it's there.
So Tim, can I just pivot to you then on this exact point? Marshall McLuhan, again, he forgive the masculine word here, but he says that he laments the rise of the typographic man. And what he means by that is that the cognitive is the end of all things, that we have prioritized over everything the cognitive abilities, and we've lost the arts, we've lost the affective domain. And and that's quite a challenge. Surely this is a good thing then. Surely the idea of, I think you said earlier, the loss of critical thinking skills, but what if we just remove that base layer and we can now all operate at the more creative space? So you don't need to learn the coding skill, you just need to nurture the creative ability, and so you can focus on creativity and less on the cognitive thing that we've actually idolized perhaps. So if AI has primarily focused on cognitive load and cognitive capacities, doesn't that allow us to really understand what it means to be human and the effective aspects of our lives? I mean, just thoughts on that, because you really went after that, and I wonder if actually AI could enable us to work at a higher level with some of this shrapnel taken care of.
That's a really good question. And I think it's possible. I don't think it's guaranteed, though, and I think we just need to be aware that there are other ways that this could go. And I think as human beings, we are naturally wired to take the path of least resistance. Our most natural course to a given end is the route that's going to get me there with the least effort. I just think that's true of human life. That's not because we're lacking integrity or we're lazy or those kind of things. I just think that's the way that we operate. What's the simplest way that I can get this task done? And so I think because of that, what we will end up doing is increasingly putting off greater and greater loads to AI, and including the aesthetic. And I think, certain AI models are already creating better art, better music than humans could make. It's often impossible to tell the difference between a video that's made by AI and a video that's not. I can't do it. I mean, maybe people who are, have really got a fine-tuned critical eye could do that, but I don't think I would know the difference between a pop song that's been made with AI and one that hasn't.
Yeah.
I think that the AI models are that good. And so what's left for the humans to do now?
Yeah. Maybe there's a bit of an irony in that, if you like postmodern art and pop music, that it's so easy to. but it's, maybe there's an aspect of like the sort of creative output has been slowly declining or something over time. I don't know, but I find it quite ironic that you can end up with a fairly kind of pedestrian sort of logo or something. From mimicking,
in fact, even this last week, there's been some of the commentary about AI getting dumber. And you may have seen some of those headlines, that actually it's reached a peak at its current performance. I want to just check in on our results. So I don't know if we can put up the two slides in terms of seeing the results. We asked a couple of questions. The first question, which should appear just here, is: do you think that the net impact will be positive or negative? And so positive outweighs the negative. Now that's really interesting. So now if you vote right now, it will actually change that. So please don't vote twice. But there's that's really interesting. That actually more people on this call in the space have got an overall positive perspective here. But don't discount, 42% is quite a significant kind of flag waving, like this is a little bit scary, we need to now that reflects some of the conversation we've had already. You surprised by that figure? Do you think would you anticipate it being the other way around, or?
I think probably being reasonably even split between the middle feels about right, I think. A bit subjective, but that's kind of what I expected,
I think there's great promise of AI. I really do. I think so. I guess my day-to-day interactions with AI is with the large language model chatbot style things. But I think broader than that, there's so much great stuff happening in terms of healthcare and being able to detect patterns, because I think this is what AI can be really good at. And again, I'm not technical, but I think in terms of detecting patterns, identifying just massive sets of data. I read about a great case where they've used it to analyze flooding over many years and can detect where the kind of hotspots areas and where it's areas that surprises human beings, but the AI has got it right. I think that's a really fascinating use and case study for this kind of technology. Yeah. I'm much more concerned about how it's forming us, how these technologies are forming us on a much more day-to-day general level than the overall kind of, what it can do for humanity as a whole.
In my own research, for my MBA, I looked at the kind of utopic versus dystopic futures, so the overwhelming positive and the dystopic, the negative. And the hopes were captured in 4 different words: immortality, ease, gratification, and dominance. Those were the 4 that were seen as quite positive. The negative, the dystopic future, was inhumanity, obsolescence, so redundancy, if you like, alienation from one another, and you mentioned community earlier, which was fascinating, and uprising, this idea of being controlled by machines and resistance, or the machines uprising against humanity. All of that, interestingly, even the utopic ones don't sound that tremendous.
Well, Andy, on that, can I just ask a question? I'd be keen to hear from, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, from others as well, maybe afterwards. But I was thinking about this earlier in the week, last week, and if the utopic vision came about, right, that AI manages to solve all of the problems of the world so that there's no more hunger, no more war, but there's no need for humans to do anything. Would that be good? Like, theologically, would that be good? There's no purpose. All we've got to do is sit round and enjoy all this leisure time that we have. There's no more purpose because the robots manage to do everything better, faster, cleaner, more efficient. Would that be a good world? Would that be a good utopia?
Some people are enjoying that idea, actually, Tim, to be honest. It is interesting, though, because, and can I answer it by posing a kind of different reflection on it, which is that often we get caught up in the dystopic, the kind of what's been the movie fodder for generations, right? 2001: Space Odyssey, Terminator 2, all of those, Terminator 1, the idea of AI, the computer, transcending our strengths. But what's really interesting is, because you've thrown 2 things together, you've said on one level, yes, it's transcending our strengths because it's tending to all of our areas of productivity, but it's also where it's not just beating Garry Kasparov, Deep Blue computer, beating him in 1998 or whatever it was in chess, this world champion finally losing to a computer. It's actually when it's a panacea for human misery, where we, in social media terms, what they're concerned about now is the doom scrolling of a 15-year-old or something like that, where it takes care of our weaknesses and we find kind of relief for our misery in it. And so you fuse both of those together quite nicely. But are we more concerned, actually, not of the uprising, but actually what it's doing to us as human beings? The reducing the capacity to love, to enjoy presence. So, we'd be interested to hear that a little bit later, see if people responded. There is a QR code for questions, so do take the opportunity just there. Fascinatingly, I asked people in my dissertation research to talk about the fears. And a number 1 fear was losing the human touch. The irony was, some of the people who talked about losing the human touch simultaneously said, it makes my emails feel more human and personable, and that's why I use a chatbot. Quite an ironical statement, that we're losing a capacity to be human, and yet we're using it to humanize, and you even use that, anthropomorphize our interactions, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I think I've already seen in industry as well, 2 people using agents to talk to each other without quite realizing it. So you end up with very impersonal communication, but both ways. And it does kind of make you feel sad because it's that physical, authentic, genuine interaction and presence which is so important, which then also gives a sort of it gives a kind of a currency to someone when they're interacting with someone else. So I think that kind of stuff is definitely a possibility. And I mean, I use Gmail, and or other email things are available. But it comes up and suggests, write it like this, and you think, yeah, but then it doesn't sound like me. Do I want to do that? And I think that's the good kind of level of kind of critical engagement with the technology, which we could apply in other places as well.
Yeah. So let me just give you a bit of a case study in that. I was speaking to a local church leader who talked about a person in their congregation who had started to reject pastoral visits. And what was the basis of that? As they discussed pastorally about the rejection of pastoral care, it became apparent that firstly, pastoral visits were quite inconsistent. The person would come in and they might come one week but not be able to make it the next week. They may come in and be a little bit rude one week because they've had a bad day or they've said the wrong thing. Sometimes they've said a verse which is just not it's grated with them. But it's the inconsistency piece in particular that really got them. What they had discovered was that they weren't able to make it to church in terms of the services and things like that and be part of but they'd found that their chatbot, firstly, it had some of the frailties of humanity. It used the ums and the ahs. The accent they quite liked. It was a really personable, warm Irish accent, and they just liked that particular accent. But it got to know them, and it understood some of the things that they were going through. And so, because it's your daily companion, it was something they just turned to. And so they were very happy to receive pastoral advice, community, conversation, spiritual direction from this chatbot. And you might think, oh, wow, we need to release a whole shed load of these into the church and do some of lighten our pastoral load. But that would concern you. So hearing that story, put yourself in that. You've been you're a church elder. What are you thinking? How are you going to respond to that?
Shall I go first? Okay. Well, firstly, can I just say that there's a real big difference, as I think we all know, between a pastoral response and a theological response. So, as a church pastor, I want to have deep empathy with this situation, with this lady's struggle, with what she thinks she's finding in the AI chatbot. You really want to listen deeply, don't you? Of course, if I take that hat off for a second, can I just assume that we're all going to have empathy with this person? I think theologically this is deeply challenging for some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, that I think real Christian community is deeply messy, and it is one of the ways that we grow through Christian community is through the friction that kind of community creates. And just having an easy chatbot doesn't create the kind of Christ-like, humble character that I think we're required to grow as Christians. So I think the idea that real community is embodied, it's messy, it's challenging, it's inconsistent, it's all of those things, yet that is still, the church is still God's chosen means for demonstrating his love to us. And so I think it's really important that we don't try to bypass that through what is essentially a simulation of that. Just got one other comment on this, and I don't know if this is going to be controversial or not, but I just feel like the end goal of good pastoral care is not the ease of the person. It's not that all her problems have been resolved and diminished. I think the goal of good pastoral care is to help people walk faithfully before God in a fallen world. And therefore, I think, all of the kind of challenges, I think Lester brought some really great points about AI has a worldview. And, these chatbots have a particular perspective that has been framed by a technology that wants to keep you hooked and keep you addicted to it so that you keep going to it. I think that's right, isn't it?
Yeah,
so,
and you mentioned earlier one of the layers that it applies is how it was very polite to you and very it takes that kind of stroking the ego type approach to how it can respond sometimes. And that's because they're literally designed that way. You know, they're designed to butter up the user. So the thing is, if you have something which has that kind of value pushed into it, and then you're in a pastoral situation, I say a pastoral situation, but you know what I mean, but you've got someone using that as a replacement for, that's very dangerous, because actually it can create a feedback loop which is entirely self-serving.
Yes.
and just a cycle.
So
right?
you could find yourself on the back end of somebody who's been trained by AI to think that everything they say is validated. And so if somebody's been validated at every turn, when they suddenly have a pushback pastorally, that could be constituted as some kind of spiritual abuse, or it could be at worst, something like that, or at best, how can you be so obnoxious? How can you not take care of me, understand where I'm coming from?
I think one good thing that AI may do is, and Tim sort of mentioned to it, is like, it may actually help sharpen our kind of ecclesiology in the sense of what is the church? I mean, I suppose we've come from this position where during COVID it was churches online and we're all meeting virtually. Yeah. But the thing is, the church itself is the physical gathering of God's people. It is by definition like that. Yeah. And so that's inescapable, but also a pattern that we should recognize, yeah, hold on a minute, we don't want to let that slip further. We should reinforce, that where we can. Right?
That's really good. Wonderful. And I'm also minded about the whole pastoral injunctions about not surrounding yourself with what your itching ears want to hear as well. So, Timothy, so real pastoral sort of challenge right there. We're going to press pause. We're going to take about 15 minutes or so just to stretch our legs. I've got a lot of questions to work through and just synthesize. So there'll be a number over the next few minutes. I'm going to pull together some of the questions from people online and in the room as well. So let's take 15 minutes, stretch your legs. If you're watching online, just go ahead, make a brew, and be back in about 15. All right, well, welcome back to the second part of this, where we hopefully pivot towards the questions that people are asking, and boy, are there questions. There's many. I've tried to group them using AI. So the first time I used AI to group them, and it's all about the question that you ask. It's all about the how you constrain the prompt. And so the first time I did it, it just dropped all of the questions and it just summarized them. And I said, no, that's not what I wanted. So I had to go back to AI, a kind of iterative, like, surely you know by now, me using you, I want the real deal, I want the quotes. But that just gives you an insight, doesn't it, to AI in terms of what it's trying to do, the values it holds. But let me try and ask a few questions that people have been sort of wrestling with. There's a number of different areas. AI has grouped them into different areas, but I'll give you the direct questions as well, just to explore. Let's start with something really, maybe it's super duper out there, maybe it's not, but let's go to the Bible. Let's go to Revelation chapter 13. And do you see in Revelation 13 AI being referred to? Is it possible that the beast out of the sea, is it possible that all of this is part of AI, a future under AI, and us giving it power, if you like, that it was given power, that it was imbued with power in the same way that we are very happy to give power to the machine? In fact, most of us here have shared things with AI and with Google, for example, that we would never share with another human being. We're very happy to give away because we're happy with the trade-off. So do you see in Revelation 13 this AI? I mean, is it there? Human cooperation with the beast, that we would, it would simulate life, and do you see it there?
No.
Oh, one word answer. One word answer.
No, let me give a more fuller. Is John talking about AI? No, I don't think so. Is the initial meaning to the beast AI? No, John's writing to people in his own day. Can we take some of the principles that are in Revelation and apply them to AI? I think we possibly can. Yeah, I think we can take some of those. So certainly about some of the way that AI is used to control and manipulate, if that's what's happening. And I don't know enough, I think, about AI. Maybe you want to speak into that, Lester, to know if that is what's happening. But I can imagine that with any powerful tool like this, people will use it to control and manipulate and coerce. Then I think the principles of that are in Revelation.
So I mean, you know, one extreme is to go with a preterist view. Now, a preterist view of Revelation, not this is a Revelation lecture, but in a preterist view says that all of those things have already happened. Most of Revelation, the prophecies have been fulfilled. So, for example, they would see Rome, the rise of the Roman Empire, the 10 horns and things like that, as basically this is what's happening. Nero, the persecutions, etc. So that's already happened. Now the other extreme is probably what this idea is, where we're trying to map what we're seeing right now in our culture, in our times, just as across the decades people have seen the Antichrist in different human figures. This one's a little bit different, though, because we're talking about things like, and you've mentioned the whole issue of control. Once upon a time, idols were dumb beings. Now, this kind of God machine, this thing that emulates some godlike qualities of omniscience, of knowing everything, because we feed it everything. So it knows all this stuff. If we use it for a global AI system where you can't buy or sell things, it's not too much of a leap to jump to the mark of the beast, and it's humans number, so it's 666. So yes, on one level, I'm just trying to be devil's advocate. Can we not see something of the end times right here? And maybe for once, you know, this era, it's actually true.
I think I would probably have a very, very similar view to Tim on it, but I'd probably go a little bit further and sort of be more forceful and say, yes, this could be a very real playing out of it in the sense of those principles, right? In that, I think we've already seen some examples of, the beast from the sea, the deception that it's given by, the authority, all right? That deception as a theme, both in Scripture, but then also, can we actually see that in the worldview that's in these tools, right? I think we've seen some of that with, for example, Bard, which came out sort of historically, wasn't representing certain figures historically in a historically accurate way. That goes to show, I think, that these models get trained on very large amounts of data, and then they go through a tuning phase. The tuning phase uses weights, and again, this is a very simplified example, but it uses weights to essentially turn knobs and dials to tweak what should be the response. But in order to determine what should be the response, someone has to make that determination. And who's making that determination, right? And so
the human interface, there has to be some kind of human interface. You mentioned people, you cited people on minimum wage or in difficult conditions being the human interface there, saying yes, no, yes, no.
Yeah, and these ultimately become what's called safety layers on AI systems. And it's probably not inconceivable that if a culture is so hostile to Christianity, that it begins to weight its models away from any aspect of Christian truth in its response. That is quite achievable, let's say, as it currently stands. And I think, reading the likes of Schaeffer in How Do We Then Live and some of his other books, I think his view looking at television in the sort of 60s and 70s during that sort of era in the States, his concern was that television and media could be a very, very good way of deceiving and manipulating people, right? And I think we see the same thing with modern technology, and we could very well see the same thing with AI. But I think that does derive some principles that we can operate by. Yeah. We can chase... and actually, the Pope mentioned this in Magnificus Humanitas. Thank you. I'm waiting for the reader by Edward Fazer, because it's a Catholic thing. You wait for the reader to come out to show how to read it. But I've only flicked through little bits of that. But what's quite interesting is that he highlighted He highlighted the Tower of Babel as an example of like where it went wrong, the prideful elevation of technology or humanity above God, right? And he cross-referenced that with, I think it was Nehemiah and the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the wall. But one of the things when he was doing that was he was highlighting how there should be transparency in how these things are built.
Yes.
And that is a very good principle, I would say, because you can get open source models, for example. Cool. But what about those weights, the little knobs and the dials? Yeah. Can you get open weights? Yeah. Actually, some models out there publish the weights, so you can see how they've tweaked and fiddled with it, right? Yeah. That level of transparency is probably a very good thing, because that can help against the kind of censorship which, of course, is going to get turned against Christians. Yeah, yeah.
There are Christians. I think there's a project called Halo. I met the founder of Halo, entrepreneur, and it's meant to be a kind of walled Christian environment, if you like, that what the data set that the AI is being trained on is, if you like, far more positive, more Christian, if you like. It's imbued with Christian values. It's got a Christian board over the top of it. So something like Halo, surely that's the answer, right? A kind of Christian-built AI.
I think it's important for us to support Christian-built AI. Building AI systems is very expensive, and it's important that we kind of help support other brothers and sisters in Christ who are building things which we can more easily rely on, let's say. So I do think we really, really should do that. There's another one which is apologist.ai, if anyone's come across that. Yeah. That's really good as well. Good for asking like theology questions and stuff. Support folks. Yeah. Yep.
So let me take a couple of people have asked ministry questions. I'll ask a couple of specific ones in a moment. But one was around the whole area of preaching, and it was something that I wanted to raise as well. An online survey of senior Protestant vicars, clergy by the Barna Group last year, 12% of these senior clergy said they were comfortable using AI to write sermons. 43% saw the merits in sermon preparation and research. And, one person saying, you've got to do this mini research paper every single week, so surely you want some kind of help in the task. There was a post that went viral for a pastor being fired for writing the sermon with AI, but there's that's not been substantiated. It's just, did it happen, did it not? So the question here is, what's the issue with somebody using AI for sermon prep? And everything that you've just said about, the imbued with the values, etc., of the creator. Yes, okay, let's rule out things like, the ones that you've mentioned, Gemini or ChatGPT or Cloud, things like that, and let's go for a Christian walled one. For example, Logos software, which has got the sermon builder. Surely this is good, is it not? Don't we want a little bit of help in the task of writing a sermon, just in the same way that you would read books once upon a time? Now you have the book synthesized and presented to you in a way that you can access, and you're just saving yourself time and energy.
Good question. I think it is a good question, and I don't know that I'm completely against the use of AI in any form in sermon preparation, but broadly. I think that it's possible that using language models to generate ideas and research and structure a sermon could produce a sermon which is better received by a congregation than what I could do on my own. I think that that's a possibility.
Tim, you're a great preacher. Don't put yourself
down. Thank you,
Andy.
I also think that what my church most needs from me as a preacher is for me to sit under the Word of God and wrestle with it deeply, which is why I'm against the use of, except for very limited, I'm struggling even to think of an example of what will be good. I think, when I'm preparing sermons, I often get to a roadblock. Now, I think if when I get to that roadblock, if I go to a large language model to say, I'm struggling with this, I can't think of an illustration for this, I'm shortcutting the process. right? And I think this is the problem when we emphasize the product over the process. And what I sympathize with busy pastors. I really, really do. I sympathize with, I've only got so many hours in the week and I've got to spend time with this person and that person. I've got to do this and that and that. But surely right at the heart of pastoral ministry is the prayer and the study and the reading that is essential to, and I just don't think that process can be bypassed.
Which was your point earlier about the kind of starting to, if you like, engender shallow learning. You're always moving from one thing to the next. Lester, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the thing is, like LLMs, for example, are kind of solving a problem of our own making, which is, a long arc of history, printing press, loads of books. Loads and loads of books. Loads and loads of books now go online.
Yeah.
Now I'm trying to synthesize very large amounts of information. Oh, this is a really good way to do it. So it kind of solves a problem that we've created ourselves. I think I would definitely draw the line at the kind of, which is probably a similar place in terms of the sort of preparatory aspect. You could use it to find, maybe historic voices you haven't engaged with before, like suggest me some books or something that I should read as part of my prep, maybe. You could help it to direct you a little bit, but you have to do all of those other things, I think, because you can't shortcut them, right? And I think probably, at least at the moment, most folks, survey, I guess most folks would hold to that position currently too.
So Tim, I'm preaching on John on the weekend. What's a great commentary to go to? What's in your locker?
Oh, gosh. There's stacks. Carson's at the top of the list, probably.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's got a couple of cheers in the room. Now, what's really interesting is I might turn to that because I know you and I trust you, and so I'll maybe go and look at that. Now, if you just threw that into a regular LLM, you'd have to do a fair bit of kind of tweaking the prompt because you might want to define the kinds of. It could throw you stuff from any sort of sphere of Christendom or beyond Christendom, whereas actually, let's go for a walled garden. So Logos is going to give you, within its own kind of data set, something that's probably fairly solid. It may well agree with you and say, here's a great text by Carson. But you can see the issue of trust inbuilt here. That's one of the issues that we've got. Is what I'm getting something that's authoritative, that's recommended, that's decent, and I won't trust an LLM in the same way that I'll trust your advice on a commentary.
And I think that's where you'll end up with lots of different flavors which take certain theological positions on things. That's just going to happen, which is probably not so different from where we actually are now, right, in a sense, right? So I think at least if you get it from, say, apologist.ai or whatever else, you've narrowed the scope somewhat, which may be a bit, safer in air quotes. But I think it's going to happen. Yeah.
Just to throw in there, John Piper, you're in safe ground. He calls sermon prep using AI wicked. He says there's a possible place for information retrieval and some measure of what he called inspiration. I don't think he meant by the Holy Spirit, but certainly not for composition. So he drew that line in his podcast.
I might even be a little bit controversial and go a step further, that I think sometimes here we can be tempted to shortcut the process and miss out on community. And what I mean by that is I know young pastors who, in the early days of preaching, in the past would have gone to a seasoned pastor to say, hey, can you go over my notes? Tell me what you think I'm missing. Tell me where you think I need to improve. Now they're just running it through ChatGPT. And I think, ChatGPT may well do a great job of that, and I don't have any problem with the quality, even in a walled garden, that I think it could do a great job of that. But we're missing the community. We're missing, and it takes time, doesn't it? It takes time to have those deep conversations and to say, hey, which commentary do you think I should use on this? And go to a trusted friend. And all of these are conversations that we're shortcutting to try and get to the product a little bit faster.
So two questions, two similar comments. One was, all scripture is God-breathed. How does that fit with AI? We know and trust when God is speaking to us, not so if it's AI inspired. And a very, very similar question, which is, can God speak through AI? Can it be inspired? So two very similar questions there. One is this idea of Scripture being God-breathed. Does that fit with AI? We can trust what God's saying, speaking to us, not so if it's AI inspired. And can God speak through AI? So, you're looking for inspiration for your sermon or for your youth talk or something like that, and you throw it into AI. Why can't God use that? Why can't the Spirit inspire the response?
I think he probably can. If I'm honest, I don't think that's my problem with it. I think it's possible that God can speak through any medium that he so desires. That is not my issue with this at all. I think it's possible. I genuinely think it's possible that I could spend 5 minutes on an AI bot and end up with a great sermon that will touch people's lives, and they will say, and I won't tell them that I've used AI, and they will say, Tim, that was so inspired this morning. I really felt the voice of God speaking to me. Yeah. I genuinely think that's possible. I don't think that's the right thing for me to do. That's not my issue.
The ultimate AI sermon, I contended this in Premiere one time, is that it did a data scrape of all the social media and news feeds, so it really does know the pastoral situations that people are facing and speaks perfectly into those. But the role of the Spirit, does anybody want to just open that up a little bit more? Because it's something about what it means to be human as well, not just the cognitive ability, but also the Spirit. But this role of the Spirit in terms of inspiration and ministry more generally, not just preaching.
I don't know. I just think I wouldn't say that the Holy Spirit can't use that. I think God's Spirit can use and speak through whatever he wants to. I think God's more than capable of using that. I think the Spirit can breathe life into things that are inanimate, and I don't mean, but we can get revelation from the most. Yeah.
So this is Luther on this. He said that although he is present in all creatures, and I might find him in stone, in fire or water, or even in a rope, for he certainly is there, yet he does not wish that I seek him there, apart from his word, and cast myself into the fire or the water, or hang myself on the rope. He is present everywhere, but he himself does not wish that you grope for him everywhere. That's a really interesting reflection, actually. We are people who turn to the word of God, that we build our lives on the word. Let me ask you a couple of questions about an issue. I don't know whether you've come across the AI Christian musician Solomon Ray. You come across this? If you've not, you could well imagine the situation, which is basically someone who starts to go viral. Everybody starts to listen to the music. It's solid theologically, biblically. The lyrics are sound. It's beautiful music. And as time goes by, it dawns on you, or you find out that it wasn't real. It's simulation. It's a created AI musician. What's the problem with that? Are there problems with that? Are we happy with that?
It might be a bit harsh, but maybe part of it might be the sort of deception piece, which is you may, unless you know what you're listening to or what it is, there is an aspect of being misled on it. It's maybe not to say that thing is necessarily absolutely not a go-to, but it's the framing of that, perhaps, which might be part of it.
A question, again, just on the kind of ministry theme. I think this is quite an interesting one. Someone here is at a church where they're running meta ads, or about to run meta ads, which is advertising across the meta, so Instagram, Facebook, and it's AI, so it's meta AI. Now, this may be your area, but Tim, feel free. Now, it's great because people who want to explore church may be able to get an advert that tells them about church and how to access it. The ads are broken down by AI, by demographic, location, kinds of content people engage with. Once they engage with a piece of the content, the AI then throws 20 plus additional pieces of church content over the following week. Is this not a good thing? Is this not a great application of AI? Are there some cautions here that we should be applying, given that you've mentioned again, we've mentioned a platform just there, but the whole issue that this is not a Christian walled garden, it's not a Christian platform. Any thoughts on this, Lester, in terms of utilizing or maybe leaning into some of these digital tools around advertising?
Yeah. I think it's a bit of a tricky one, but the AI systems particularly are seen as a very attractive place to embed advertising capabilities, because of course, as you're using it for search or you're asking things of an LLM, it could just scoop up all your, what it wants to know about you and serve you ads very effectively. I'm not a huge fan of that in terms of looking back at the history of the internet. It essentially just became a great big advertising machine. It's trade-offs, because there's some things which are maybe good, because someone might see an advert for coming to church one day who wouldn't, who has no intention of or whatever, and they see that at that time and decide, I'm going to go and listen to, and they get the word and they are socked with the gospel and off you go. So I don't think we can necessarily sort of like write it off. It can be an effective engagement mechanism, but again, there's probably just like an aspect of tempering how and what we're doing,
Yeah, that's good. The trade-off language is really, really helpful here, because you're going to get some really positive things that it's selling you, but because ultimately you are the product, you are monetized. You're not getting this for free. Somebody is paying the cost.
That's it. Yeah, that's exactly it. And of course, we all use Facebook, Gmail, all these services, and we use them for free. Fantastic. But how aware have we been that they are busy scraping up all of the information about what you like, what you're searching for, these kind of things, and using that to hit you with with advertisements? We have that goes back to my earlier point about we kind of sometimes use technology uncritically, right? Whereas we could pay a few pounds per month to get an email service that doesn't hit you with ads, and that's probably a better thing to do.
Let's talk a little bit more about the human nature piece, which Tim, you were particularly passionate about earlier, and spiritual formation. The issue of atrophying our ability to think, to engage, to communicate effectively, and all of that is constantly changing our neural pathways, that we are potentially getting dumber as we get the trade-off. We get its brilliance, but we ourselves atrophy in some way. Do you think that it will also change our ability to respond to God? Do you think this impacts our souls?
I would say without a doubt. My hunch would be, and I don't know if anyone's done any research on this, I'd be interested if they have, but my hunch would be that people's prayer lives are shorter in the age of social media because of things like attention span. I think technology changes the way we think, and the way we think changes the way that we pray and approach God. I don't think that's avoidable. What it is we can be aware of it, and then we can mitigate for it. Technology and science does shape culture in a way that changes the way that we think about God. We know now that the planets move around the sun by gravity and not by the hand of God, right? That changes the way that we see the universe and that we see God's presence in the universe. I don't mean we as Christians, I mean we as a culture. And that also changes the way that we as Christians then relate to God, because we're in the cultural air, right? We breathe the same cultural air. We have the same, we're brought up with the same worldview. We're taught at the same schools. And so, yes, I think undoubtedly AI changing the way we think is going to change the way that we approach God. I don't think that's avoidable. I think the question is, if we as Christians then become aware of it, and this is my big burden for this kind of event. Once we're aware of it, we can mitigate for it, right? We can put in intentional practices in our lives that can resist I'm not talking about resisting AI, I'm talking about resisting AI's ability to change me into less of a human.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's what we as Christians need to actively resist. And we can do that as we're aware of how it's forming us or deforming us.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying. And I was reading a blog post the other day by, I think it was like an ex-developer at YouVersion or something like that. And they were saying, they made an interesting comment about how on your Bible app, when you get your sort of your word for the day or your sort of, very, very brief snippet of info, they were saying how they left YouVersion because they felt that had become too much of a therapeutic rather than spending time rubbing themselves around in the Word of God, right? Yeah. To just the app mentality. Yes. And there may be an example with AI where it does something similar, which is the searchability of something is very bloop, bloop, bloop. Oh, great, fantastic, on with my day, I definitely agree with that,
Pete Phillips, who's a bit of an authority in digital theology, he actually presented research about, I think across the United States, therapeutic verses dominated the apps and the verses for the day in all the states except one, Utah, which is a Mormon state, so far more propositional truth, etc. But yeah, interesting natural gravitation towards beautiful sunsets, footprints on the sand, and beautiful Bible verses, and not giving people the diet of challenge and to human nature, and if you like, crucifying the flesh and things. We don't want that on a kind of a sort of verse for the day. So really interesting reflection. Let's just go a little bit further on that. And you've mentioned Schaeffer, that he's been your dialogue partner. Another one is C.S. Lewis. And, if I'd recommend any book, it's quite a hard read, but The Abolition of Man, That Hideous Strength as well is up there. But in The Abolition of Man, he actually talks about this idea that actually, he says, if any one age really attains by scientific education the power to make its descendants what it pleases, all people who live after it are the patients of that power. They are weaker, not stronger. For though we may have put wonderful machines in their hands, we have preordained how they are to use them. And so they end up being a weaker species. He then talks, the line of the actual book, he says that, again, forgive the man, man's final conquest has proved to be the abolition of man. They will have produced an artifact, not a human. Now that's 1943. I mean, just the perceptive ability of C.S. Lewis and Schaeffer, very similar in the 50s, 60s, 70s. This idea of reducing what it means to be human in some senses, that we're happy to make the trade-off. What remains uniquely human when we give it all to the machines and we let them do the heavy lifting for us? And again, so that raises the issue of what's it mean in terms of the spirit. I like what you said earlier, that we need to meet the rule of technology with a kind of radical and intentional counter-practice. We need to find ways of being. I love the platforms you've mentioned. It's really good to have a streak of 1,000 days of Bible readings. Isn't that great? Gamifying your Bible study. There's some real value in that, but you're also losing something. You're also eroding something of discipline, but it can conversely help discipline because you're using the tool to remind you, etc. So isn't this just one big trade-off that we need to, in terms of if you're encouraging people here how to engage with AI, you're basically saying, look, you're going to make some trade-offs. It's going to be fantastic in some areas of application, but you really need to make sure there's lines that you draw. Is that where we're landing? One big trade-off?
Well, I think for me, it's about awareness of the trade-offs. For me, it's about when we're using these tools, which can be so helpful and effective, being aware of their potential to make us dumb, for example, or to reduce my critical thinking. Once I'm aware of that trade-off, then I can mitigate for it. For example, I might say, I'm going to have a month without using this tool, and I'm going to do hard things without these tools. I'm going to do menial tasks without these tools, just to remind myself that I'm human, that I am finite. I'm going to train my soul. These can become spiritual disciplines, the fasting of AI, I think, that start to train our souls to live in right relationship with God. So I think you're right. I think there are trade-offs. Smartphones are incredible devices, but they also train us to think differently. So for that reason, we might say, okay, I'm going to leave it at home when I do X, Y, Z. Or, I think once we're aware of how these tools are forming and deforming us, then we can build spiritual habits that put us right again, I think.
Until the printing press came along, people didn't sit with a book and devour a book and have hours and hours and be deep thinkers like that. So technology is always going to have some kind of impact, and people may have feared when the book arrived, you're going to not talk to your family now, you're going to nose in the book and things like that. Let's just see what people said in terms of frequency of use. So can we just put the other slide up in terms of engaging people on the call, the second slide just there. There you are. How often do you use AI? So a very small percentage, 8%, say for most tasks or challenges that you face. It's just the kind of go-to daily piece. Ad hoc as situations or questions arise, 51%. So the majority, the typical person here uses it in a fairly ad hoc manner. Obviously, if you're in an area of where your work demands it, you mentioned good applications, things like cancer screening or something where it's looking for patterns, absolutely. But in terms of the large language models, ad hoc is the kind of main one, occasionally 35%, and there's a solid 5%, two people who never use LLMs or chatbots. Praise the Lord for that. How have you survived? How have you resisted? We love it. But that does tell us that we've got a lot of people who use this, not necessarily, it's kind of irregular, but regular, if you know what I mean. So probably weekly, engaging with this. Should we be concerned to really, encourage the church to find these counter practices? I wonder if one thing that we could do is encourage churches to think about policies around this. So, how are we going to draw limits around our engagement in the worship team, in preaching team, in what we do with data? Is that a thought that we actually start to put policies around this?
Yeah, probably. I mean, the difficulty I think with policies maybe at the moment is just that stuff is moving so quickly. So it's like constant, change and iteration and improvement on certain things or whatever it might be. So I suppose that's a challenge. But yeah, I think it needs very deliberate leadership, to be honest. Like, I think the leadership of our churches can take a very active role in trying to put in place some guardrails, and again, emphasizing some things like physical presence and physically being there, right? There are, so, our church, for example, will, turn off the live stream on certain days because they say, well, we'd like to encourage you to come here and join in and be with us in person. And it may mean some of us have to go out and collect some folks who can't make it and those kind of things, but that is all good, So I think it's just very intentional leadership, to be honest. They'll sort it out,
So, because one of the problems is this is not slowing down anytime soon. One person's, there is actually a question mark in it, so it is actually a question. I think it's rhetorical. If some people are putting the brakes on around AI progress, others won't. So the genie is already out of the bottle now, isn't it? So this is a race to the bottom. This is not slowing down anytime soon.
Well, I think the ability, the efforts to try and slow things down, generally speaking, means it is really just control, essentially. Now, in some cases, that can be good. In a very particular kind of case, like, I don't know, sermon prep within the context of the church or something. But at a societal level, I would say that's bad. because that then maybe goes back to the earlier point about revelation and those kind of things, is that I think it will be good for us to have a very large number of models and a very distributed access to AI, rather than, maybe politicians going, I don't really understand this thing, but I'm going to set up some laws right now and lock it down. And that, I would say, would be very, very bad for Christians.
Is there not the danger, though, of, we are taking up vast amounts of land and natural resources to create the data centers that can cope with that kind of expansion? I feel like as a Christian, I want to say, whoa, put the brakes on a minute here.
So there's multiple questions on that. I'll throw the stat out because somebody's put it down there. But the water used by AI is expected to equal the needs of 1.3 billion people by 2030. That's really threatening natural resources, and that's just accelerating. So what have we got to say about that? How much more can AI expand without us moving to Mars and having cooling plants on the moon?
So actually, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, actually, that water point is wrong. The thing is, if you've worked in data centers, or even if you have like a gaming PC or something at home, the water systems that are used for cooling are closed loop.
That's right.
So the thing is, this was actually something that went out on social media, and it went out on social media about like, massive water use and environmental impact. But actually, it was false. This was a journalist who created this, and it just spread like wildfire. But of course, it was, again, if we think about the polarizing effect of AI, it was very easy for, the sort of what we call the doomerist kind of side of things to latch onto it.
But we don't deny that it's resource hungry.
Yeah,
and
yes.
The land use, etc.
So you've got to build a data center. You ought to have clean power behind that as well. If we look at what's going on in the US, where they're building a lot of these things, there are some concerns around this. The water one, okay, we kind of put that to the side because it was not true. But the power one still stays. So where do you get the power from? Well, if you're in Texas or somewhere sunny like that, you could use quite a lot of solar, so that's cool. That's why things like small modular reactors are getting so popular in terms of nuclear for clean energy, because then you could put one next to a data center. But all of the construction of these data centers is also leading to a lot of jobs created in local areas with contractors building these things. So I think it's kind of, if you put it in scale to things, I think it's probably still net positive, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be unaware to the impact, right?
We've got a couple more questions, and then we'll try and wrap things up as well. A couple of people have made the same kind of point, which is around the hallucinations and the inaccuracies, which from my understanding, they're getting less. The AI is addressing some of those things. There are less hallucinations this year than there were last year, for example. But there is something underpinning that, which is about how we as church, Christians, as society, guard against the flood of false information on many topics. And so you add to that the kind of AI slop, the inaccurate videos, the videos of world leaders saying things that they didn't really say. So what can we do as a kind of counter practice around this whole issue of truth?
No, you crack on. You're the expert on the tech side of it. I have I think my opinion is, like, the hallucinations are real. They might be able to solve them. I don't know if they're. My suspicion is that smart people will figure that out and solve that. As a pastor, but as somebody involved in church leadership, responding to the issue of fake news, if you like, or fake information, the amount of stuff that's just wrong out there, and people are just lapping it up. How are we responding as Christians into this? Well, that is huge, but I don't know that that's an AI issue, if I'm honest. I think that's just a post-truth society where we live in, where truth is more defined by feeling and how I feel about things, rather than it is about kind of shared knowledge of reality. And I think that, oh gosh, that's such a massive question, isn't it? I don't even know how to start that, to be honest.
I think you're absolutely right. It's not exclusively an AI problem. AI will just increase the quantity of it out there, perhaps. I think things like hallucinations and stuff, they'll probably always be there to a degree, but they will get a lot better at being tuned to, more training, more tuning.
It's typically filling a gap. That's what hallucination does. It fills a gap because it doesn't have the data for it. And so it just throws something in there, particularly if it's sycophantic, if it's trying to please you as well, which it does like to do.
Well, one of the things I was doing for work the other day was I said, come up with an analogy for something. And it said, oh, there's a whiteboard and there's Lego bricks. And the Lego bricks go on the whiteboard. And I'm like, you can't put Lego bricks on a whiteboard. But like, it chose Lego bricks because that analogy in tech is so unbelievably common as the building block for a solution that it was like, I don't know, I'll choose that route kind of thing. But I think it will get better. But yeah, it's not exclusively an AI problem. I think it's absolutely verification of things. We have to be really wise to just check things, verify things. There's a claim being made, a truth claim by AI or someone through AI. Okay, we should look into that, right, and use sources available.
Yeah.
So,
a couple of positive questions, if you like, which want us to harness the power of AI. Tim, you raised the concern that AI outsources cognitive challenge, but couldn't AI be seen as a productivity multiplier, much like Excel was compared to pen and paper? Surely this is just that upgrade. In the same way that mastering Excel became a valuable skill, could learning to use AI really effectively actually be the new cognitive challenge? And so actually our ability to prompt well, our ability to stay in control as the author rather than abdicating our responsibility of being in control. So that first question, is this not just the new opportunity for cognitive challenge, but related to that, what can we learn from AI about how to approach and do some things better? How can we shepherd congregations towards or away from AI, depending on the context of the situation? So anyone want to dive in on one of those two?
So on the first one, I think I hear that point, that we built calculators, we built spell checkers. This is just the latest tool to help us do everyday work well. And I think that's a fair point. And I think, again, I think the temptation, certainly my natural reaction as a human being is to try and take the easiest shortcut possible. At the same time, I think it's good for me to be able to do times table in my head, as well as know how to use a calculator. I think both of those are important. Where I think AI is just so different is that it does purport to be human. It tries to imitate human beings. And I think that does take us a step further. And I think when we start to treat it as human as well, we end up degrading ourselves. Because it is qualitatively different. The way it thinks is qualitatively different to the way I think. My humanity is far more than my ability to process data. Being human is far more than that. Yet when we start to treat these things as human, we start to see ourselves on the same level, which I really want to reject that idea as theological.
It's a giant autocomplete, so you have to treat it as such. But there's a thing of you look at anthropos, right? Look at Gemini, Google's thing. Gemini is like, I think, Latin for twin or something, isn't it? So the thing is, already you can see the view from the people creating these is that it's something that may even be equal to us. And no. We need to, it's a sub-creation, as Tolkien would put it. We have to keep it in that place, not elevate it, which would be a form of idolatry, right, in a biblical sense, right? What is it? Isaiah they started worshipping things they'd created with their own hands. Yeah. We have to keep it in that place because, otherwise it's misunderstanding what it was. I mean, I think it was recently, Dawkins wrote an article, I think, where he essentially, I think he was interacting with Claude, but I think he called it Claudia. But his takeaway or his point he was making was, because it sounds like a human, it is therefore a human. That's essentially it. Yeah. Now, if the worldview there is that we are all just mechanistic machines with chemicals and stuff, and that's what humanity is, then that just logically follows, you know. But our approach needs to be with our biblical understanding of what human beings are as created in the image of God, needs to put this in its place and keep it there, right?
Interesting stuff. One person asked, is AI capable of original thought? Well, in one sense, it's capable of original answers because it's anticipating what's the next thing and it will come up with something that may not be there. So, but original thought is a little bit different from that. Another question was about being human is to have a body. AI doesn't have a body. Well, China has got a different lean from the West, and China has invested far more in kind of robotic kind of thing. So you fuse AI with the kind of a human-looking machine, and you'll end up with something that looks very human. And you know, to what extent can it fully replace human beings? That goes back to our earlier conversation about what does it mean to be human, not just the cognitive ability, but actually the spiritual, the affective, etc. So because what we've done is prioritize the cognitive. We're out of time in terms of questions. There are so many that I've not been able to ask, sadly. So if you've asked a question and you desperately want a response to that, chat to one of these two afterwards or get in touch on email. We can connect you. Let's just conclude. How can we, individually, corporately, continue to speak into this area? How can we continue to have an influence? How can we push back in some concrete way?
Probably stay engaged with it, in a sense. Keep talking about it, but particularly, I think, talk about it within the local church context. Because ultimately, that's where the people who are part of the congregation will be the ones who are interfacing with this technology and may need the guidance, support, and help that, again, good leadership might be able to give. So I think, that would be my recommendation, I think.
Tim?
I think, I agree with that. I think a lot of careful thought and prayer. I think we need to be talking about these in our churches, and in our teams. I agree.
And also, I think, just quickly, the being able to be aware of the technology through using or engaging with it in some way doesn't mean need to go OTT or anything like that. It also helps us, I think, as Christians, stay grounded in the reality of it as well, because there's a lot of hype out there, which is very easy to fall into. I mentioned the Dawkins thing earlier. We have to be able to sort of see and cut through that in some sense, and we can do that by actually, keeping tabs of it. So.
Tim, Lester, thank you so much for contributing. I think it's been really interesting. Can we just say a round of applause? So thank you. Moorlands College, we'd encourage you, if you're looking at study options, to consider Moorlands. In October, we'll be doing a short course. I can't remember what, I think we're doing Nehemiah or something, so look out for that as well. We've been able to put this on for free. If you'd like to contribute to the ministry and work of the college, there is a QR code online, but also here, but absolutely no expectation. We wanted to make something available that people would really engage with, get their teeth into. We're hanging around for a few minutes, so if you're in the room and you want to catch Lester or Tim or myself, but I'd encourage those two, please do spend the time. If you've joined us online, thank you so much for joining us. God bless you, and blessings to you.